Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you. Greetings from Durham, North Carolina, in the USA. I certainly wish I could be there in Argentina or wherever you're signing in from today, but I will do the best I can to update you on some work that I'm doing with my ALS Untangled program virtually. And so today's talk is ALS Untangled, Help for the Internet Buyers Club. And I know many of you are probably familiar with this work that I do. But just to give you a little bit of background, so it's been my experience in the past 25 years and over 5,000 patients and families that I've worked with that many people with this disease want to try things. Certainly understandable. We're making some progress, but we still don't have ways to stop or reverse the disease for the vast majority of patients. And so it's totally understandable that people would want to try things. And I would hope that most people would be able to try things in clinical trials where there's products that we know a lot about, where there's a lot of oversight, there's a lot of measurements, but we also know that there's not nearly enough clinical trials for everyone living with this disease around the world. And so most people are kind of left with this option of self-experimenting, where they buy and try products that they find on the internet. And there's no shortage of these things that I call alternative and off-label treatments. I abbreviate them as AOTs. In fact, I think if you Google ALS treatment right now, you'd probably find over 100,000 things listed on the internet as possibly being effective for the treatment of ALS. Now, as far as the evidence that backs up some of these extraordinary claims, oftentimes there's very little or no backup. So here's a screenshot of a product that was out there for a while called Mototab, and it was calling itself the world's most relied upon treatment for motor neuron disease. It was claiming to be clinically proven, guaranteed to work. You're at no risk for trying this product. Unfortunately, if you clicked on any of those links, they didn't lead anywhere. There was never anything posted to back up any of those claims. And people are allowed to do this because there's no such thing as internet police that hold folks to these kinds of claims. And the situation would be bad enough, except people are actually being harmed in the pursuit of these AOTs. We've seen evidence of financial harm. Some of these products cost hundreds, some cost thousands, some cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've seen physical harms, even in clinics that claim to be perfectly safe, where you're at no risk. We've seen evidence of infections, blood clots, tumors comprised of someone else's cells. In other words, they went and got injected with what they were told was stem cells, and it was actually precancerous cells that they were injected with. And we've even seen deaths in some of these clinics that continue to advertise themselves as perfectly safe. And last but not least, there's a scientific harm that comes from this. And so I've certainly seen people in my clinic who would be really good candidates for one of my clinical trials, but they choose instead to pursue some of these things on the internet, and that harms our enrollment rate. So we have a very low enrollment rate in clinical trials. We enrolled about 2 patients per site per month. And this is at a time when many of us see 50 or 60 patients in a month. And that has consequences. It means our trials cost more. It means they take longer. Ultimately, it means that we're going to take longer to find a cure for ALS than we should. And I don't think anyone feels like that's acceptable. And so in 2009, I got together with some of my colleagues and we started something which we called ALS Untangled. And we had this goal, which would be to use our years of science background to try to help people living with ALS to make more informed decisions about all these products that are out there. And over the years, we've kind of tweaked what we've done. We didn't really have a template to follow. There was no one, and there still isn't anyone else doing anything like this that I know of in any other disease. And so we've developed a way to get information. We've developed a way to do our investigations or reviews, and we've developed a way to get our information back to people. And it all revolves around a website that we created, alsuntangled.com, .org, .net. We own all the domain names, so it should be pretty easy to find. As far as how we get information, we try to make it easy. I mean, you can ask your doctor about something and they can get the information to me. You can email me directly. You can post on social media that you're interested in something and tag me. But it seems that people are getting to me because we have an ever-growing list of things that people want us to review. In fact, we have so many things that people want us to review that I probably won't live long enough to get to all of these. There's over 500 things now on the future review section of our website, and we're trying to find ways to prioritize these. So one way is by votes. Anybody anywhere in the world can just click the vote button next to the name of the topic they're interested in, and it will move up on the list. And you can see that some of these things have close to 2,000 votes. And we also have a multiplier. Most things get multiplied by one, so it's primarily the votes, but we do sometimes get asked about something that we can't find any useful disclosable information about. Like if the only information is on a website and the website's password protected, and we reach out to the person who's running the website and ask if we could get some questions answered, and they say, if you write one word about us, we will sue you. Well, we're not going to be able to write anything about that until something becomes available. So we multiply by zero in that case, and it drops to the bottom of the list. And sometimes we actually have a clinical trial that's been done on a topic. And in that case, we get a lot of good information. And so the multiplier there is two. How do we do the reviews? Well, we have a team, thank goodness. It's a pretty big team. There's now 130 clinicians and scientists from across 11 countries working on this together. And I've noticed we actually don't have anyone on the team from Argentina. We'd love to have someone. So if somebody listening has a science background and wants to be part of this team, just email me. We've also developed what we call standard operating procedures, SOPs, that guide everything that we do, from specifically how we get our information to how we write the draft to how we crowdsource it and ultimately publish it. And everything that we do revolves around something we invented called the table of evidence. So for every new topic, there's 5 things that we want to know about it. What's the mechanism of action? And does this make any sense based on what we know about ALS? Has it ever been given to any kind of preclinical models, cell models, animal models? And if so, what happened? What are people with ALS who tried this saying? And can we find those people? Can we talk to them? Can we get their medical records and prove that they're real, that they really had ALS, that something good really happened? Are there any trials? And if so, what happened? And then finally, what are the risks? So what kind of bad things could happen? How bad are they? And how likely are they to happen? So once somebody writes a draft, it gets circulated across the whole team and everybody has a couple of weeks to weigh in. And I try to incorporate all those comments and suggestions into a final draft, which gets sent on to a peer-reviewed medical journal called ALS and Frontal Temporal Degeneration. And it gets then an independent review from someone who's not part of our team. And I have to respond to that person's comments. And then ultimately it gets published. And we have an agreement with the journal so that all of our reviews are published through something called free open access. That means nobody ever has to pay anything to read these. And you can find a list of all of our 78 published reviews on our completed review section of our website. So if you were to click on the name of any of these topics, it would open up the whole review that you could read. If you don't want to read the whole review, you can just look and see what the grades that we gave it are. And so I know some people care mostly about what other patients say. So you'd look along the cases grades, look for A's or B's. Some people care mostly about risks. And so you'd look along the risk column and you'd look for things that have very low risk, A's or B grade. Now, some of these things are getting pretty old because the program's now been around for 16 years. So we've had to go back and update the review, and you'll see a little star next to it. So you can see the star next to ketogenic diets. And sometimes we've learned that people don't actually want to read something. They don't want to read a whole scientific article. And so we do podcasts where somebody who has lived with ALS interviews me about that particular topic. And you can see a little microphone button next to that particular review. And of course, we've learned that non-English speaking people around the world are interested in this information. And so we have now some partners who are fluent in Spanish and Italian who've been helping us to translate parts of the website into other languages. And so it's a huge program. It's grown bigger and more complicated than I ever could have imagined. I spend personally almost every night and weekend working on this program. It's fair to ask, is it a success? Well, all I could say is we have gotten some awards from patients and from our peers. I can tell that people are reading our reviews. The journal keeps track of the most downloaded reviews in its history. And we have #1, and we also have 8 of the top 10 most downloaded articles. Some of these reviews have over 50,000 downloads now. Collectively, the series has over 400,000 downloads, and people are listening to the podcasts. And I've learned some things from running this program for all these years. I've learned some things about the people who sell these products. I think there's a, a suspicion that many of them are, I guess, some people use the word con artists. I've not found that to be true. I've actually found that most of these people really believe they have something that's helping, and they don't really have any interest or knowledge of how to prove it scientifically. But I've also learned that some of these people do things at the bedside really well that mainstream doctors should pay attention to. They're incredibly optimistic and they're great at boosting hope, which I think is really important in a disease like ALS. They're very respectful of patients' opinions and they're very responsive to their questions. I've been in some of these clinics and I've seen these folks stay late at night and answer everyone's calls and emails before they go home. And I've not found that to be true of every ALS clinic in the world. I've learned that the progression of ALS is tricky no matter what measurement we use, but especially when we use the ALS functional rating scale, the progression is not a linear decline. So it's not only different between patients, but it can be different in a patient at different times. So here's one patient from a database whose ALS FRSR score was monitored over 600 days. And you can see that it bounces all over the place, the progression. And there's a period of time between day 400 and day 550 when it's not changing at all. And then there's a period of time between day 550 and 600 when it's actually going up significantly. So it's not uncommon for there to be plateaus and small reversals. And this makes it very difficult to interpret treatment benefits. When a person in a social media account says they tried something and their progression slowed down, it could just be the natural history of the disease. There are even a few patients, 62 now that I know of, who appear to have recovered all or most of their lost motor function. And I've got some theories about those patients that I'm tracking down. But I think the most important things that I've learned are about the products themselves. And again, I think most doctors feel like this whole group of products is probably a waste of time. And I would say there certainly are some that we found that are a complete waste of time. And the worst things that we found, they share some things in common that I will call red flags. And I would say if you're out there and you come across a brand new website and we haven't seen it or commented on it yet, ask yourself how many of these red flags are associated with that person or product or website. And the more there are, the more you probably should run from that particular website because the least promising it's likely to be. But I've also found some things that actually do look really promising. And, this list changes every few years as new trials come out. But this is the current list. So here we are in May of 2025. And I would say there's 8 things that I think are the most promising for people who want to self-experiment. And those are acetyl L-carnitine, antiretrovirals, clenbuterol, L-serine, methylcobalamin, a product that has a combination of nicotinamide, riboside, and pterostilbene, a product that has a combination of quinidine and dextromethorphan, and a drug called tamoxifen. Each of these products has plausible mechanisms by which it could slow the progression of ALS. But even more importantly, each of these products has been in at least one clinical trial in people with ALS and has shown benefits. Now, does that mean these are proven to work? Unfortunately, no. All the trials that are associated with these products are small and have flaws and would need to be replicated before we could be absolutely sure. But I do think for people who are going to buy and try things, these are the most promising. So just to kind of wrap up my short talk today, it's very clear to me that people living with this disease want to try things. And I wish everyone could find a clinical trial or expanded access program, but I know that's never going to be true. And so most people with this disease are going to be left with only one option, self-experimentation. And there's a lot of options out there on the internet for what to buy and try. Many of these alternative and off-label treatments. Unfortunately, the information that's associated with these is often flawed or non-existent. And that's why I created ALS Untangled, the X-Files of ALS, because I believe the truth is out there about these products, but it's not always easy to find. And so we're working hard to try to make sure that people living with this disease can make the best decisions about what things they want to buy and try. And we're learning some really important lessons. So I'll just stop and thank people living with ALS for being the inspiration behind this program and everything else I do. Our sponsor, which is the ALS Association, our collaborators, including the journal that publishes these for free, and all the reviewers around the world who are volunteers, as well as Code the Dream, who makes our website, and of course, my Duke ALS care team for helping me build this foundation of great care upon which this and all my programs are built. So, Pablo, I hope that was what you were looking for, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. That was excellent. I know it was very, very interesting. So, okay, Richard, I noticed that among your list of your most of your eight most promising AOTs, New Dexta is there. New Dexta is been around here in Argentina for a while, and quite a few people have been taking New Dexta for the pseudobulbar effect,
Yeah.
but they also some of them, or I would say quite a few of them, had also experimented some benefits in their swallowing and in their speech. Could you address a little bit about that specific product?
Yeah. So, Nudexa is the brand name, and it contains two ingredients, dextromethorphan and quinidine. And yes, I mean, it's a very interesting product as far as its development. It was being tested to see if it could slow the progression of ALS because dextromethorphan is in the same category as riluzole. It's a glutamate antagonist. It didn't work. But people in the trial came forward and said, wow, that problem I was having with uncontrollable laughing or crying, it's much better. That thing that you called pseudobulbar affect, it's much better. And so the company said, huh, well, we didn't know it would do that, but let's go ahead and try to develop it for that. So it did some more clinical trials targeting pseudobulbar affect, and it worked beautifully. It's the most effective thing we have for pseudobulbar affect. And in fact, it got FDA approved shortly after those trials were done for the treatment of pseudobulbar affect. But in the years since, many of us have noticed anecdotally that some of our patients have dramatic improvements in the clarity of their speech or in their swallowing or their handling of oral secretions. And so the person who has been behind this product from the beginning, a neurologist named Richard Smith, he's led a couple of really nice randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials showing that it definitely does improve bulbar function. Now, like everything else, it may not be as dramatic in some people as it is in others. So, the problem that we have in the United States with the type of insurance system that goes on over here is we're only allowed to write prescriptions for things that are on label. Otherwise, insurance rejects them. So, like, I cannot write a prescription for Nudexa to treat somebody's dysarthria or dysphagia or a secretion problem. Insurance will just reject it and the patient won't be able to get it. So I'm hoping that somebody with some money decides to take this forward and get more approvals for bulbar function, so separate from just pseudobulbar affect. But for right now, I prescribe it in people who have both pseudobulbar affect and bulbar dysfunction. And I say, look, we're using it for the pseudobulbar affect because that's the official labeled indication, but we're also hoping it will improve your speaking and your swallowing and your secretions.
And just as a note, we talked to Dr. Gary Petit a couple of years ago, and he literally said it is a disgrace that Nudexa is not an ALS approved drug. A drug. Yeah, that's how bad we need a proper clinical trial and a large clinical trial to finally prove that Nudexa is good, not only for pseudobulbar affect, but also for swallowing and speech.
Yeah, Pablo, so many things in this world come down to money, and that's what this is all about. And I mean, the funny thing is, there are companies out there who are all about repurposing drugs. And I've tried to get an audience. I actually have gotten an audience with some of them, and I've told them about this. And I'm hoping one of them will pick it up and run because there's money to be made. And I actually don't even need if don't even know if another trial would be needed, to be honest. I mean, there are two trials, both randomized, double-blind, and placebo-controlled, and we know a ton about this drug from a safety and monitoring standpoint. So it would not surprise me if they were able to actually get an approval without doing any more trials. It's just a matter of somebody got to take the lead on that.
Absolutely. You just said that you can't prescribe products that are not officially authorized for ALS patients. But what you've been recommending lately for your patients? I know you see patients on a daily basis.
Yeah,
Can you name a couple of those AOTs that you've been recommending these last days or these last couple of years?
definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, it comes down to the conversation about experimentation starts with, can we find a trial or an expanded access program that you can participate in? Because those products in those types of programs are the ones we know the most about, that are probably the most promising. Again, unfortunately, there's just not enough trials or expanded access programs. So I follow about 550 patients, and I'm going to say 450 of them can't find a trial or an expanded access program. So the vast majority have to self-experiment. And so then it comes down to me of, let's ask some more questions about this particular person. Do they have a lot of bulbar dysfunction? If so, is there any pseudobulbar affect at all where I could write down that diagnosis code with the hope of treating that plus the bulbar dysfunction? Is this person in the first year of their ALS symptoms? If so, I believe the most promising product is a high dose intramuscular methylcobalamin. I mean, the data from Japan are pretty extraordinary. That's another product where if somebody with some money decided to take that to the FDA, I'm pretty sure they could just go ahead and get it approved with the data that's out there. But it does look to me like it only works if you get it started in the first year of symptoms. I don't see any real evidence that it helps if you started after that. And that's not most of my patients. So for everybody else, I personally think the most promising alternative and off-label treatment is that combination of nicotinamide riboside with pterostilbene, which is put together in a capsule and sold under the name Basis, BASIS, from a company called Elysium Health. Now, why do I say that's the most promising? Well, again, the components have plausible mechanisms, but even more, there's a clinical trial. The company who owns that product did a clinical trial in people with ALS, and it was randomized and it was double blind and it was placebo controlled. Now, it is not perfect. It is small. It's only 30 patients and it's short. It's only 4 months, but they did publish it in a peer reviewed medical journal. And the results were the kind of thing that's almost too good to be true. Like they say that people who got on a high dose of that product were actually recovering lost function by the end of 4 months, whereas people on a placebo were much worse. And so there's a huge separation between the two groups. Like, I don't know of another clinical trial that's ever been done in the history of ALS that showed results like that. Of course, the trial needs to be replicated in a larger, longer design. But in the meantime, for people who want to buy and try something, I think that's quite promising.
And another side note, a couple of years ago, we talked to you. You gave us a talk about methylcobalamin. Remember about vitamin B? So
I do.
that's something that our viewers here can check out in our YouTube channel for sure.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, Richard, we always talk about this specific topic, but it's always good to refresh. Can you go through the those famous red flags that we need to be looking for? When you gave us that talk during the pandemic, I believe it was in 2020, there was a very public case here in Argentina with this former rock drummer that had ALS and unfortunately passed away. And he was involved and he participated in some kind of alternative therapy that didn't quite check out, right? And so we needed to talk about those red flags in that moment. So, but can we review those red flags?
Happy to. Yeah, I think this is so important because, again, these websites are going to start off usually with somebody's story who had an amazing, recovery from ALS. This is how many of these websites lure people in and get them to spend a lot of money. And I would say that the first is anyone who's charging an enormous amount of money for something that's experimental. that's a red flag. That's unethical. Like when we're doing a clinical trial and offering you something experimental, we don't ask you to pay $10,000 for it. Um, Anyone who has a website who's advertising what they do as effective for, a large number of the world's worst diseases that have nothing in common. Like I see these websites for stem cell clinics and, hyperbaric chambers and things like that that, not only ALS, but Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, brain tumors, lung cancer, fibromyalgia, diabetic neuropathy. Like these things have nothing in common. There would be no reason why one treatment would work for all this. Any place that cannot explain to you what kind of scientific and safety oversight they have. Like if you come and get in on experimental therapy in a clinic like mine, I could tell you, well, the FDA is looking over my shoulder, and so is the Duke Institutional Review Board, and so is a Data Safety Monitoring Board comprised of an independent group of doctors and statisticians. They're all looking over my shoulder at what's happening to you in this study. But most of these other places have no oversight whatsoever. Anybody who doesn't have a consent form, who just says, let's do it, give me a check and let's get it going. Like if it's experimental, there should be a written document that explains to you exactly what this is, what the theory is, what the evidence so far for it is, and what kind of bad stuff could happen, and also who to contact if something bad does happen. Most of these places don't have it. If there's no known mechanism by which this thing could work, okay? So look, there's websites out there for energy healers that have amazing stories on them. But as of today, there is no evidence that energy could come out of someone's hands and heal a neurodegenerative disease. Like that biology has not ever been demonstrated. Anybody who's doing things and then doesn't ever want to see you again, unless you want to pay and get another injection of whatever it is that they're doing, like someone who's really a scientist who's doing something experimental and trying to figure out if it works, they're going to want to see you back and measure things. So if they don't have anything like that, that's a huge red flag. Anybody who's got something underway and never presents any of the outcomes to their peers, never comes to any meetings, never presents any presentations, oral or poster, never publishes anything in a journal about what they're doing, that's a huge red flag. Like that's how science advances. It's not easy to go to a meeting and present something and know that you're going to get critiqued, but it's part of the process. Like all of us who do this, we want to get better. We want people to try to poke holes in what we're doing so that we can try to plug those holes and be more clear about why we think this works. Anybody whose only evidence of benefit is a story, like I already told you, that stories are not reliable. Even if it really is a person with ALS, even if their progression really did slow down alongside when they took something, that could just be the natural history of the disease. The disease will sometimes just slow down. It will sometimes stop. It will sometimes reverse. None of those things is proof that a treatment works. Anytime somebody's offering you something and you ask them about their credentials and they have no scientific or medical credentials, maybe they're a real estate agent or an accountant that's telling you how to treat your ALS. Like, why would this person or a movie maker, why would this person know how to treat your ALS? They don't have any relevant background. And then, maybe the worst one of all is anytime somebody at one of these clinics is advising you to divorce yourself from mainstream medicine. Like that's a huge red flag. Some of these folks portray themselves as victims. They're not victims. We're all on the same playing field. Science doesn't discriminate. We all have the opportunity to set up experiments in the right way, present the data for peer review, get feedback, and advance our ideas. Anybody can do that. But somebody who claims that they're a victim, that their treatment is being buried, it's nonsense. And when you divorce yourself from mainstream medicine, we haven't figured out how to fix this yet, but we do have a lot of things that we can do to make your life better and longer. And so you just basically pass up all that stuff. And that's probably the most frustrating thing that I see sometimes is people come and I'm the fifth or sixth doctor that they've seen and they haven't settled in anywhere. They're not taking the medicines that we know work. They're not getting the multidisciplinary team care that we know works. They just want to stop in here with a bag full of 30 supplements that they purchased online and they want to go through those. And I say, well, we can do it, but you have no foundation. Like you should build a foundation that's solid of evidence-based care. And on top of that solid foundation, then you can experiment in a way that makes sense. But with no foundation, it doesn't make any sense. So that's what I think about the red flags.
And information can be overwhelming, especially when you just get a diagnosis like this one. I can say that I can speak for myself because I experienced that with my brother, and but it's always good to have someone who is going to be in charge of your team, right? Like a neurologist, a proper physician, and then you can explore, you can experiment, but always, being advised from a professional, right? It has to be a combination, a balance between alternative therapies and therapies, mainstream
Yes,
therapies, right?
exactly. You got to build that foundation. And if I could say one more thing, I would say almost every ALS doctor or scientist in the world who knows about this category of stuff is frustrated by it, right? But it's our fault that so many people are out there making bad decisions about the things that they buy and try because so few of my colleagues will actually spend time with patients in clinic trying to find experimental things for them to try. Like I believe most patients and families, they do want to hear from their doctor. They trust that person. And but the thing about it is that many of my colleagues are not even willing to talk about this stuff. And that's unbelievably frustrating. Like it's happening, whether you want to talk about it or not. Wouldn't you rather have it happen in partnership with you and your team in a way that's based on science as opposed to, outside your field of view where people are not getting credible scientific suggestions? I mean, I don't know what to do about it except keep talking about it. But I think if you're an ALS doctor, if you're a young person and this is the field you're thinking of going in, you got to understand that this is happening and you got to embrace it and figure out a way to guide your patients toward things that are more promising and away from things that are but less promising and more risky.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our mainstream clinical trials, the ones that have been going on in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Okay, we did have a couple of setbacks in ALS research. That's something that we need to acknowledge. Well, but we also had a great victory with tofersen. Can you speak a little bit about how do you see the current ALS landscape in terms of clinical trials?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the most exciting it's ever been. So I think what we're learning is that there are subsets of ALS. And I mean, it should have been obvious, but it wasn't, that there's not going to be one treatment that's a home run for everybody with the disease. I remember when I was growing up, they used to talk about let's find a cure for cancer. And now we know that's ridiculous. Like there's not going to be one cure for cancer. There's a lot of different kinds of cancer. And depending on what kinds you have and how far it's spread and things like that, the treatment's going to be very different. And I think what tofersen teaches us is that we can hit home runs in ALS if we target subsets that we understand the biology of real well. So we knew about SOD1 ALS for a long time, 30 years. We've been modeling it in cells and animals, and we had a pretty good idea of exactly how those mutations caused the death of motor neurons. And then we figured out a way to block it. We put that into a clinical trial, and lo and behold, it turns out to be a home run where most people who are on that now for a couple of years stop progressing, and about a quarter of people who are on it actually recover significant amounts of their lost motor function. That's what we're looking for with every subset of ALS. But I think it starts with understanding the biology. And that's why I think the most exciting trials are the ones that target genetic subsets. So there's trials going on for people with FUS ALS. There's trials going on for people with C9orf72 ALS, for TDP43 ALS. I mean, as we understand subsets, we will get a much better hit rate, and the hits will not be small. The hits will not be 27% slowing in the rate of decline on the ALS FRSR score, which nobody can perceive. The hits will be stopping or reversing ALS like we see with tofersen. So I would like to see more efforts underway to target subsets of the disease and fewer efforts just general Hail Marys targeting everybody with ALS. I just think those are extremely unlikely to work. Now, you mentioned, that we've had a couple of failures and one success, and I would say the field is kind of trying to figure out where drug approvals should happen. Traditionally, drug approvals, they required two very large, very long duration phase three randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials. That's how the drug really is always approved. It takes years, probably takes 10 years, from the time that you're ready to start doing trials to the time that you get that kind of data. And I would say that's too long for a disease like ALS. And so I would rather see things get what are called early approvals or accelerated approvals or conditional approvals, even though I've recently learned that we don't have a pathway like that. We should. There should be a way to approve a drug for a disease like ALS when we have some data that suggests that maybe it's more likely that it helps than it harms. You approve it, but you require another study to be done to be absolutely sure. And if that phase three trial that was required turns out to be negative, then you pull the drug from the market. And that's what happened with AMX 0035, even though it wasn't technically a conditional or accelerated approval. There was a promise made at the FDA by the owners of that drug that they would do another trial. And if that trial was negative, they would pull it. And that's what happened. So I don't think that we made a mistake by approving that drug. I think that's exactly how drug approval should work. And I would say tofersen is an example of where we hit a home run with that same kind of process. 10 years ago, tofersen would not have been approved. In fact, it probably would have been thrown in the garbage because after 6 months, it didn't really show any dramatic clinical benefits. It showed some amazing biomarker benefits that really suggested it was going to work if we could just keep people on it longer. And thank God we had those. And thank God we had, groups like the FDA that said, we understand the unmet need and this is enough for us to grant this special type of approval. We're not going to stop studying it, but we think there's enough to get this in the hands of people. And it was a home run. So I would say we're one for two on those early approvals. And I think that's the way we should continue to approve drugs. But what we can't do is give something an approval where we have one small phase two study with one outcome measure that's marginally better on drug, and then just give it a full approval and say, don't worry about ever studying it again. Like in my country, that's what happened with edaravone or Radicava. And it's unfortunate because, I mean, there's now data from Europe that suggests that that probably doesn't work, at least for most people. But the company that owns it is never going to do another phase three trial. And so I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think there will always be some people who are put on that drug by their doctors, and it's incredibly expensive and it can have side effects. And I just feel like that's a mistake. Like we should have approved that in a different way. And I hope that kind of approval never happens again.
Clear. Thank you for that. Okay, so to wrap up, as I said before we started recording this, we would need to address the elephant in the room. You are a researcher in the U.S. You've been involved in ALS research for decades, and I'm sure you've been through many different stages, difficult years, good years, great years. I know you've seen it all, but this particular year, this 2025, really doesn't seem to be just another year. We've been hearing announcements, and just days after those announcements, we've been seeing how measures are being taken, and how that is impacting the whole scientific landscape, especially in the US, and it's also impacting the world. So how are you how are you dealing with this political scenario in the US?
Yeah, I would say there's a few things that are happening. I would say one of the most troubling things that's happening worldwide is it seems a lot of people have lost confidence in science. And if you were at the Stephen Hawking lecture in Montreal, there was a gentleman from Montreal who leads a group called Science Up First. And he gave an amazing presentation to just show how the public's trust in science has gradually eroded. But what I loved about his talk was rather than kind of leave us down in the dumps by showing this, he actually had a theory for how we could get it back. And he said, we have to kind of look at the tools that caused this in the first place. And so social media, influencers on social media, and anecdotes, right? I mentioned before the problem with anecdotes from a science standpoint, but anecdotes for a lot of people who don't have a science background, a story of someone who tried something and either had a good or a bad thing happen afterward, even though a scientist understands that's just an association and it could be a theory, but it can't be accepted as proof. A lot of people accept it as proof. And so he said, we never want to stop doing, our large, long, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials and presenting them for peer review and publishing them in good journals. We can't stop that. But if we want to win the public's confidence back, we got to use those same tools. And it's part of the reason I'm back on social media. It's part of the reason I try to put a lot of information out about what I'm working on and why I'm excited about it. Put a face on it, a passionate face. Um, I'm not an influencer, but I do think that scientists need to think about partnering with influencers because it's one thing if Rick Bedlack says something, it's a whole nother thing if Madonna or Lady Gaga or, Patrick Mahomes says something. I mean, they have, double digit millions of followers and they're going to listen to what their celebrity of choice says. And so we need to find a way to get those people to help us spread our messages. But, from a standpoint of what's happening specifically here in the United States, yeah, I am kind of surprised at how fast a lot of things changed. So one thing that happened was there was an attempt to become more efficient with government spending, which I don't think anyone disagrees with. Of course, we want all of us to be as efficient as we can with the resources we have. But some of the ways that it took place are a little surprising. So within the National Institute of Health, which is the largest funder by far of research in our country, and really including ALS research, there used to be something called an indirect rate. And so an institution that got a grant from the National Institute of Health was allowed to take 65% of that grant to use for what's called indirects or overhead. Now, some people would wonder, well, what exactly is that? Well, I'm talking to you now from a building. Somebody has to pay for this building. Somebody has to pay for the taxes on this building. Somebody has to pay for these lights to be on. Somebody has to pay for this internet. When I decide to write a new protocol, I have to apply to the FDA to get their permission. It would be very inefficient for me to spend an entire week filling out an application to the FDA. Like we have an office here where people are employed to do that. I send them my protocol and they help me with all that. And they respond, to questions and problems that the FDA has with what I want to do. There's an IRB that has to be approved. Those people, their salaries are paid by indirects. Um, there's any number of people that work in the grants office to make sure that the money's coming in and going into the right grants. They don't bill. They're paid by indirects. So there's a huge infrastructure that supports research that has to be covered by those indirect costs. And I don't know where the number 65% came from. Maybe it was fair to say, is this really the right number? Could we bring it down some? You would bring, the leaders of institutions to Washington, D.C., and you would ask, where did this number come from? And, is it possible that we could cut it back as we're trying to become more efficient? But in one day, it went from 65 to 15%. Somebody just decided we're going to make it 15%. That's hundreds of millions of dollars for every institution across the United States that does research that was just gone. And so it's being challenged in court. I don't know what's going to happen, but in the meantime, institutions are preparing for the worst, which is that all of a sudden they won't have hundreds of millions of dollars. And so what does that mean? Some institutions are firing a whole bunch of people. Many institutions are putting the clamps on us as far as any spending. So, I mean, I have other types of grants, like a discretionary fund. So if I give a talk and I get paid for it, the money goes into that discretionary fund, or um, there's other things that I can get paid for, educational work that goes into a discretionary fund, and that was usually the money I would use to travel to meetings. And my boss told me that ain't happening. That's all frozen. So part of what I loved about my job was being able to go out to meetings and present my research, get peer feedback, see what other people are working on, give peer feedback, bring those ideas back to my clinic. And that's really kind of the foundation of science. And if that stops, I don't know what's going to happen to science. Like if a young person who was going to go into science says, well, wow, I mean, this doesn't look like there's any resources anymore. Maybe instead of going into science, I'll go into business or I'll become a farmer or something else. Like in 3.5 years, when we might have a change in our institutions in our country, you can't just pull all that back. That's gone. If somebody gets frustrated and retires, you can't just snap your fingers and bring them back. They're gone. They're on to something else. So I'm afraid this really could have devastating consequences. And I'm fighting tooth and nail. I'm writing letters to my Congress people and explaining, why this is an especially bad time to pull funds away from ALS. I mean, we just hit our first home run. Why would we want to pull funds away? We're on the cusp of hitting home runs in this disease. And I'm trying to explain to my institution, my bosses here, why travel is essential. If we want our faculty to be on the leading edge of patient care and research, we have to allow them to travel. That's an important part of being a researcher. So I don't know, Pablo. I mean, we'll see what happens. It is scary, it's frustrating, but at the end of the day, I still have a lot of people with ALS that I have to keep fighting for. So I'm still in the fight.
Very clear. Thank you for that. And we are having a similar situation here in Argentina with cuts and everything, and scientists just leaving the country. So it is worrisome, but we need to keep fighting. You're right about that. Okay, Richard, thank you so much for this. As always, it's not the first time, and it's very generous from you, and it's always so interesting to talk to you. And I'm sure people will enjoy your presentation and all your feedback and your advice and your recommendations. You are one of those persons that we should listen to, and that's why we keep calling you back and inviting you to these talks. And it's always good to have that perspective. As I said before, someone who comes from science, who has all the scientific background, but at the same time is open-minded enough to try new things, always, with some scientific basis. And it gives a lot of confidence to other people, to our patients and families who are looking for, trustworthy information. And so what you're doing with ALS Untangled is like incredibly important for our community. So we want to thank you for that as well.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Pablo. You're one of my favorite people in the ALS community. You're always positive and passionate, and I love that about you. So anytime.
Thank you so much, Richard. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you next time.
Sounds good. Bye
Bye,
bye.
Richard. Thank you so much.